Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 595. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. This will be the last show for the week, but we have a big week ramping up next week. Connor Freeman will be back on the show on Sunday, and then our old friend Misty Winston is returning Monday afternoon. We're going to record an episode on the results of the Assange hearing in the UK. So that'll be a big show. So Sunday and Monday next week, we'll have new content. And then, of course, I will be out with a solo show probably Tuesday and Wednesday to catch up on all the news of the first half of the week. Of course, you can follow this show so you never miss an episode at YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee. Anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And of course, if you follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, you'll get all my work. That includes the articles I write, this episode, and anything else I think is, extremely important that I will tweet out. You could also find this show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the news editor, and on antiwar.com on the blog, where I am the opinion editor. If you didn't get enough of my content this week, I was on the Scott Horton Show. That's now out on the Libertarian Institute feed, or just, anywhere you can listen to the Scott Horton Show. I was also on Judge Napolitano's Judging Freedom. That was Thursday, May 16th. So check out that appearance if you haven't already. I think I did a pretty good job on the Judge's show. And if you like my appearance, leave some positive feedback in the replies there. And additionally, I was on with my friend Kyle Matovic on Wednesday to talk about some Libertarian Party business. So if you want to hear my opinions on things other than foreign policy, check out at least the last 20 minutes of Kyle's show. We do get into quite a bit of foreign policy in the beginning. All right, let's get into the news today. First up here from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. Major development in the world that gets almost no attention. Xi agrees to deepen China-Russia military ties, brushing off U.S. warnings. So Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping held talks in Beijing on Thursday and agreed to deepen military cooperation as China brushed off U.S. warnings about its relationship with Russia. According to the South China Morning Post, Russia and China released a joint statement that said that they would further deepen mutual military trust and cooperation by expanding joint military exercises, increasing air and sea patrols, and strengthening their coordination under bilateral and multilateral frames. And so that probably means that they're not only looking to conduct these bilateral drills, but looking to include North Korea, potentially Iran, and other countries in some of their military drills. Xi also renewed calls for a peace deal in Ukraine. He said both sides agree that a political settlement of the Ukraine crisis is the correct direction. China's position on this issue has been consistent and clear, including the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries and legitimate security concerns of all parties. China has consistently called for peace talks in Ukraine throughout the war, while the U.S. and most of NATO have opposed the idea and flooded weapons into the country. Regardless, the U.S. and NATO have accused China of fueling the conflict by increasing trade with Russia, a natural step for two countries facing similar pressure from the West. China doesn't provide weapons to Russia, but the U.S. points to the export of technology that can be used to build weapons as evidence of Beijing providing material support to the Russian military. The U.S. recently sanctioned 20 Chinese companies for trading with Russia. And additionally, the U.S. just before this happened put a bunch of new tariffs or increased the tariffs on China. And so again, as Dave writes in his article, and I think it's just so important, that this is a very natural step. If the U.S. is trying to hurt the Chinese economy, and it really seems like that's what we're trying to do. It's not just about protecting the American economy, but we have threatened to and tried to hurt the Chinese economy, and we're trying to isolate Russia from the world. That these two very large countries, with China being a very major economy and Russia being a mid-tier economy, are obviously going to do a lot of business. And of course, Russia has a lot of things that China can produce a lot of domestically, and China has a lot of things that Russia isn't producing domestically, and so they're just natural trading partners. Now, of course, it didn't have to be this way. Of course, the U.S. could have had better trade relations with China, and then we probably could have pushed them away from forming such strong ties with Russia. We could be exporting more oil and such to China, or we could have not placed the economic embargoes on Iran and Venezuela and crippled their oil industries and allow, China to buy their fuel or something like that. But, the way the U.S. has played this out, it has really forced these two countries together. And additionally, with Russia, all we had to do is not expand NATO to Ukraine to not have this major contest between the two sides. And in fact, if you look at the rhetoric from the early 2000s and after the Cold War, Russia really did want to work with the U.S. They didn't see another Cold War on the horizon that was really created in Washington. So while Putin was in Beijing, the Pentagon issued fresh warnings to China over its relationship with Russia. Eli Ratner, Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Indo-Pacific Affairs, spoke with a Chinese military official and raised serious concerns over China's support for Russia's defense industrial base that enables Russia's war in Ukraine. And look, even if it is a Russian invasion of Ukraine, it is just too obvious, I'm sure, to the entire world not to notice that the U.S. is literally pouring in weapons it could find from nearly every nation, just sending any weapon platforms it can, including outlawed cluster bombs into Ukraine, right? These weapons are being dumped into Ukraine by the U.S., and then we're going to fault China for selling Russia maybe some chips or other type of manufacturing goods that could be used in Russian weapons is just absurd. All right, Ukrainian officials asked NATO to send troops to for training inside of Ukraine. So Ukrainian officials have asked NATO countries to send troops to Ukraine to help train 150,000 new recruits, the New York Times reported on Thursday. The report said NATO countries are inching closer to sending trainers, which could mark a significant escalation in risk war with Russia. A small number of U.S. Special Operations Forces have been inside of Ukraine. At least 97 was what we knew of in March of 2023, but an open deployment to train large numbers of Ukrainian troops would take things to another level. The U.S. and NATO have been training Ukrainian troops inside of Ukraine before Russia's February 2022 invasion. Since then, the training has been held in Germany and other parts of Europe. But Kiev wants to shift that back inside Ukraine so the Ukrainian recruits could be quickly deployed to the front line. So far, the U.S. has not agreed to the request, but it appears Washington is considering it. I really do have questions about how long it would take to get Ukrainian troops from Germany to Ukraine, that it would really be worth it for the Ukrainians to hold the training inside of Ukraine. I mean, this seems like bait to me from Kiev, that they're trying to bait the West into sending more troops into Ukraine, knowing that Russia is going to strike these training facilities and probably kill some of the Russian NATO trainers, and maybe use that for a way to drag the Americans into the war. Because again, the U.S. says it's able to get weapons that they announced from Washington to Ukraine within a couple of days. And look, I know that people are different than weapons, but at the same time, if you're able to get things into the country so quickly, you would think you would be able to shift the troops into the country fairly quickly. And again, it would be safer. I mean, these would be massive targets, I'm sure, for Russia, these training facilities that Russia would just target them and kill the soldiers there, would be my guess. So the Times cited a U.S. official who said one possibility could be to train Ukrainian troops in Lviv, a western Ukrainian city that is near the Polish border. Russia has bombed the city throughout the war, including strikes a few weeks ago that targeted energy infrastructure. In comments on Thursday, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, said NATO training deployments was an inevitability, but appeared to rule it out for now. We'll get there eventually over time, he told reporters on his way to Brussels. He said that they if they were sent now, it would put a bunch of NATO trainers at risk, and that Ukraine would have to choose whether to use its air defenses to protect the infrastructure or near the front lines. And maybe that's a second possibility of what the Ukrainians are thinking, that if NATO puts their trainers in Ukrainian cities, then they will deploy their own air defenses to those cities, and they could shift their air defenses to other places. These are maybe the kind of thoughts running through some of the desperate minds in Kiev right now. Other countries have expressed interest in sending troops to Ukraine despite the risk of sparking a direct war with Russia, which could turn nuclear quickly. French President Macron has repeatedly said he wouldn't rule out sending troops. Lithuania has said it's prepared to send trainers, and Estonia has said that it's seriously discussing the idea of sending troops to Western Ukraine to fill duties that free up Ukrainian soldiers so they could be deployed to the front. Now, I'm not sure how effective or helpful that would be. I know a lot of what Ukraine is missing is trained soldiers, and so they need to be trained in waging frontline tactics. What they're talking about is freeing up soldiers who are doing maintenance in Kiev or Lviv or somewhere else in Western Ukraine. Well, I'm sure they are to some extent trained in combat, but they might need significant more training to be able to do anything other than hold and shoot a rifle from a trench if you want them to operate artillery systems, tanks, or any of the other Western Soviet equipment that Ukraine is trying to operate at this point. All right, next up here, Zelensky blames the world for Russia's Kharkiv offensive. So Ukrainian President Zelensky visited Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv Oblast on Thursday and blamed the Russian offensive in the region on the world for not sending enough weapons. He referred to the delays in Congress passing a $61 billion Ukraine aid package, which was authorized last month. Brigades are not totally equipped because the package, which we waited for 8 months, he told NBC News. Asked what is happening in Kharkiv is America's fault, Zelensky replied, "It's the world's fault." When asked he said it's the world's fault. They gave an opportunity to Putin, but now the world can help. Zelensky claimed that if he had just 2 more U.S.-made Patriot air defense systems, Ukrainian forces would be able to hold the region. We are in need of 2 more Patriot systems. Russia will not be able to occupy Kharkiv if we have these. While Zelensky blamed Russian success on weapon shortages, Ukrainian soldiers have said there were no proper fortifications, despite the intelligence that showed Russia was massing troops on the border with Kharkiv. There was no first line of defense. We saw it. The Russians just walked in. They just walked in without any minefields, said a commander of the Ukrainian Special Reconnaissance Unit earlier in this week. He continued, either it was an act of negligence or corruption. It wasn't failure. It was betrayal. And so, it does seem like as much as Zelensky just wants to blame the West. And look, the West told them that they would give the Ukrainians everything that the Ukrainians needed, and they have these air defenses, and they're not giving them up. At the same time, there's a lot of Ukrainian corruption causing the problems that Ukraine is facing. All right, now let's shift over to Rafah. This is really what I want to cover on the show today. I think there may be significant developments in Rafah over the weekend, so I didn't want to have a huge amount of news to talk about. But first, let's talk about the politics in the U.S. House passes bill that would force Biden to give paused bomb shipments to Israel. So the House on Thursday passed a bill designed to force President Biden to lift a pause on shipments of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. The legislation is considered symbolic since President Biden has threatened a veto and is not expected to be brought up for a vote in the Senate. It is seen by an effort of Republicans to show that the GOP is a staunchly pro-Israel party. The bill passed on a vote of 224 to 187, with 16 Democrats and nearly every Republican in the House voting yes. Only 3 Republicans were opposed: Representative Thomas Massie, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Warren Davison. The bill would prohibit any arms shipments to Israel from being paused, limited, or canceled, and require the prompt delivery of weapons to Israel. The legislation is also designed to withhold funding to the Pentagon, the State Department, and the National Security Council, so salaries won't be paid to any U.S. official involved in limiting military aid to Israel. Obligations under the bill are fulfilled. And Glenn Greenwald explained this on his show. His show is fantastic, by the way. You guys, if you don't listen, I would definitely recommend it. He recently had on Jeffrey Satz for a really insightful interview. But one of the things that Greenwald explains is there's a constant hysteria in America about national security and how we have to constantly protect our national security, and Americans have to give up their freedoms for national security, and we have to spend $1 trillion a year on national security, and yet we don't give a few bombs to Israel, and suddenly you have 208 House Republicans and 16 Democrats willing to vote for a bill that would strip away and defund a large portion of what they deem our national security just because there's not a few 2,000-pound bombs headed to Israel. This is absolutely wild. Republicans are fuming over the pause on the 2,000-pound bomb shipment, despite the fact that Biden also pledged to maintain long-term military support for Israel and moved forward with a new $1 billion arms package this week. His administration has also promised Israel will give every penny of the $17 billion in new military aid that was recently authorized by Congress to Tel Aviv. So Representative Tom Cole, a Republican from Oklahoma, said, "This is a moment of moral clarity. You either stand with Israel and the right to self-defense against terrorists who wish our American harm, or accept standing a dangerous message of weakness to our enemies. We can't equivocate in our support for or waver in our promise of never again." Of course, this is just disgusting and stupid. It does the opposite of what he says. It doesn't make America more safe. It doesn't make America less safe. And Israel, of course, does not have a general right to self-defense against Gaza, right? Like, Israel, of course, is an occupying power of Gaza, and so they can take action to arrest, kill, in whatever way, capture those who are responsible for October 7th. But it's not like Israel was attacked by another country. They were attacked by people who are occupied by Israel. And so, it's a completely different situation than how Congress is making it sound. And of course, the idea that it really does make Americans less safe. Right now, Gaza is littered with bomb casings and failed munitions and destroyed Israeli vehicles that are all made in America. A lot of these weapons that Israel is using are made in America. The words on them are written in English, and I'm sure the people of Gaza and the people of the Muslim world who see these images of just spent casings of American weapons all over the place, and the murder of innocent Palestinian children by the tens of thousands, are going to blame the U.S. for this, and some people are going to come here looking for vengeance. So Dave wraps up here. The Democrats who joined the Republicans in supporting the bill, which condemned the president, Biden, are Representative Richie Torres, a Democrat from New York. These are all Democrats, so I'll just say the state. Angie Craig, Minnesota, Matt Courtwright, Pennsylvania, Henry Cellular, Texas, Don Davis, North Carolina, Luis Frankel, Florida, Jared Golden, Maine, John Gutenheimer, New Jersey, Greg Landsman, Ohio, Jared Moskowitz, Florida, Frank Palleone, New Jersey, Mary Peltola, Arkansas, Marie Goosekamp Perez, Washington, David Scott, South Carolina, Darren Soto, Florida, and Tom Scuzzi of New York. So list of shame for the Democrats right there. All right, now let's get into the article that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on May 16th. Human rights researchers conclude Israel committing genocide. So a group of researchers at top universities concluded Israel was committing a genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza since October 7th. Israeli forces had destroyed most of the homes in Gaza, leaving 5% of the population dead or injured. So the University Network for Human Rights Study, led by a group of researchers from Boston University, Cornell Law School, the University of Pretoria, and Yale Law School, published a report on Wednesday that found Israel's actions in Gaza violate the Genocide Convention. The report says, after reviewing the facts established by independent human rights monitors, journalists, and the United Nations agencies, we conclude that Israel's actions in and regarding Gaza since October 7th, 2023, violate the Genocide Convention. Specifically, Israel has committed genocidal acts of killing, causing serious harm, and inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of Palestinians in Gaza, a protected group that forms a substantial part of the Palestinian people. Israel has killed at least 34,568 Palestinians and injured 77,765 other Palestinians in Gaza. These figures in total comprise more than 5% of Gaza's population, with over 2% of Gaza's children killed or injured. The report highlights statements from Israeli officials that have driven its forces to conduct genocide. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, U.S., remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible, and we do remember. The Bible passage referred to reads, "Now go attack Amalek and prescribe all that belongs to them. Spare no one, but kill alike men, women, infants, and sucklings, oxen and sheep, camels and asses." And so, again, Netanyahu is citing a verse here, a religious verse that calls on his soldiers to kill everyone in Gaza, and we've seen them do it. It also notes, and there's a long list of Israeli statements here. I think these are the two most telling, Netanyahu's, and then here the one by the defense minister Yoav Gallant, calling the Palestinians human animals and calling for a complete siege of Gaza. He said, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we will act accordingly," he said in October. One of the report's contributors, Susan M. Ankrum, director of the Boston University International Human Rights Clinic, said the report details so many statements by Israeli leaders that show the plan to decimate the Palestinian population. While the White House continues to deny that Israel is committing a genocide, the White House is continuing to deny that Israel is committing a genocide. On Monday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan explained the Biden administration's position. "We believe Israel can and must do more to ensure the protection and well-being of innocent civilians. We do not believe what is happening in Gaza is a genocide." Washington and Tel Aviv's most crucial supporter, the White House wields its veto power at the UN Security Council to deny Palestine membership and to block resolutions critical of Israel. Additionally, the U.S. supplies Israel with 70% of its weapon imports, including billions of dollars in weapons paid for by the American taxpayer. President Biden has refused to alter his policy of military support for Israel. The White House has put one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs on hold while authorizing a $1 billion arms package for Tel Aviv. And so, the Biden administration, it has just full-throated supported this, and it's becoming more and more clear that this is a genocide, and it's not just by the tally of Palestinians killed in Gaza, but just the statements that continue to come from the Israeli leaders. All right, so next up here, one of those Israeli leaders, Yoav Gallant, announced on Thursday that Israel will send more troops to Rafah and intensify operations in a city where around 1 million civilians are sheltering. And I think this is a big challenge to Joe Biden. Either you're going to follow through with your pledge that you're going to withhold weapons from Israel for conducting these operations or in Rafah, or you're going to be, shown to be a liar and that your red line didn't matter. So Gallant said this operation will continue with additional forces that will enter this area. Several tunnels in the area have been destroyed by our forces, and more tunnels will be destroyed soon. This operation will intensify, and Hamas is not an organization that can regenerate itself now. The announcement from Gallant comes despite the U.S. claiming that it is opposed to a major Israeli operation in Rafah. President Biden has threatened to withhold certain types of weapons from Israel if it launches assault on population centers, but so far he hasn't imposed any of these consequences, and members of his administration have said that, Israel has already forced about 500,000 people to flee from Rafah. That's about a third of the people that were living there before the attack. And that clearly, and that Israel is forcing the depopulation of Rafah, which Biden said there wasn't a clear plan what the Israelis would do with those people, which the Biden administration said there isn't one. They would stop supporting the Israeli military in Rafah, and they're just simply not doing that. It's absolutely baffling. So Israel has escalated in areas in northern Gaza as well, where it previously claimed to have defeated Hamas. So Israel has ramped up strikes across the Gaza Strip, killing scores of Palestinians in the past week. The Israeli military has faced severe resistance on the ground in both Rafah and the Jabalia refugee camp, and at least one Israeli soldier has been killed in Rafah. The Israeli military said on Thursday that 5 IDF soldiers were killed in a friendly fire incident in Jabalia. And so the toll is mounting for the IDF. They are losing more and more soldiers. A large number of them are due to friendly fire, but that may be because of the kind of hit and run tactics that are being used by Hamas. Either way, this also disproves what Gallant said in the beginning, that Hamas will not have the ability to regenerate itself. It seems that Israel declaring victory in an area and then going back to that area to try to stomp out Hamas again indicates that the group does have ability to replenish its ranks. And this is what has been concluded by Israeli intelligence agencies and American intelligence agencies. All right, last story before I wrap up for the week here. Israeli drone strikes killed 2 near South Lebanon funeral procession. This one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. An Israeli drone fired on a car near a funeral procession for Hassan Ibrahim Mak, Hezbollah commander who was killed earlier this week. The drone strike killed at least 2 people. Details is still emerging, but both slain were young men, and the agency that arrived on the scene said that one may have been a member of Hezbollah. The strike on the car took place in Qana near the city of Tyre, which was just the side of a strike that killed the man the funeral procession was for. Israel has also reported to have attacked several other cities around Lebanon. Israel presented the strike as a targeting of a terror cell on its way to carry out an attack. It's not clear that was the case, nor is it clear where they had been traveling to, possibly after the funeral. Meanwhile, a Hezbollah drone exploded in northern Israel and wounded 3 soldiers, one of them seriously. Reportedly, the drone strike targeted a vehicle as it was carrying Israeli forces. The drone itself was armed with a pair of rockets, which exploded when it crashed. Earlier, Hezbollah fired scores of rockets at northern Israel, resulting in sirens going off. Some were intercepted by the Iron Dome, but no damage has been reported so far. Israel and Hezbollah have been carrying out tit-for-tat strikes virtually on a daily basis for weeks. Today, the attack came just days after an Hezbollah strike against Golani Junction, the deepest strike into northern Israel yet in the war. And that seems to be one of the trends, is that the strikes are getting deeper and deeper, not only into Israel, but Lebanon as well. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for the week. Again, make sure you subscribe because we got a lot of important stuff coming at the beginning of next week. Thanks, y'all.